This Super Robot Wars OG Saga Endless Frontier retrospective was brought to you by my lovely patrons Omar Ismail and Cameron Strauss. For as little as $3 Australian a month, you can get your name shouted out at the start of every Xenosanctum video, as well as access to bonus behind the scenes content, link in the description below. When one thinks of Monolith Soft, most will immediately jump to the Xeno series as the game's most synonymous with the company. However, exploring Monolith Soft's fanbase on Twitter, I've noticed a sizable amount of support behind the two Super Robot Taisen games Monolith Soft made on the Nintendo DS. So let us take a look back on this niche but well-loved saga of Monolith Soft's history with Super Robot Taisen OG Saga Endless Frontier. Warning, the following section is poorly sourced and likely contains errors. As I talked about in my Xenoblade Chronicles retrospective, the late 2000s were a very turbulent time for Monolith Soft as their relationship with the now merged Bandai Namco deteriorated. This led to the company to break away from Bandai Namco in 2007 and join forces with Nintendo. This gave the company more creative freedom to develop games in return for exclusively releasing those games on Nintendo's platforms. Despite leaving Bandai Namco, Monolith Soft would still offer to collaborate with the company and its subsidiaries. One of those subsidiaries would be none other than Bandpresto, the former employer of Namco X Capcom director Soichiro Morizumi. Bandpresto had approached Monolith Soft to create their latest game in the Super Robot Taisen, or Super Robot Wars, original generation series. Now, I know next to nothing about the Super Robot Taisen series, so here's a quick rundown on the series. Originally starting on the Game Boy, the Super Robot Wars games have since grown into a massive mashup series of multiple popular Japanese mech franchises like Gundam and Gurren Lagann. Much like Namco X Capcom, along with the cameo characters from those series, the game also features original characters to help drive the plot. Eventually, Bandpresto decided to make games based solely on these original characters in the form of the original generation games, and it was in this sub-series that Monolith Soft would make their next game. For the latest game in the series, Morizumi would return as director, along with Koji Ishitani as producer. The two would also be joined by Bandpresto's Kensuke Tsukanaka and Takanobu Tereda, who would act as supervisors. As part of the original generation games, Super Robot Taisen OG Saga Endless Frontier would be built around an original cast of characters. However, with the Super Robot Taisen series being built around crossovers and Morizumi recently finishing Namco X Capcom, the team decided to add some additional characters from Monolith Soft's own Xenosaga, as well as Namco X Capcom itself. The game would be revealed and released in 2008 on the Nintendo DS. A US release would come a year later in April 2009 in a premium format coming with a bonus soundtrack CD. Unfortunately, due to this premium format, the game was not a huge seller in the US, and combined with no power release has resulted in this game being extremely expensive and difficult to procure. Is it worth finding though? The game begins with an introduction to the world of the Endless Frontier. In this universe, multiple alien worlds are connected to one another by dimensional rifts known as crossgates. The different cultures of these worlds would soon find themselves in conflict with one another until a peace was settled around 23 years ago. Jumping to the world of Los Herencia in the present day, we meet our protagonist Haken Broing, along with his female android sidekick Ashen Brodol, as the two explosive crash ships from another world called the Mai Taira. Getting deeper into the ship, the two come across a young girl sleeping in one of the abandoned crew quarters. Waking the girl, she reveals her name to be Kaguya Nabu from Kagura Amahara, a neighbouring world. Realising that she is a princess, the two decide to escort Kaguya back to her home in order to receive a large bounty on her rescue. Leaving the Mai Taira, the two stop by their own ship, the Z Crocodile, where they introduce Kaguya to their crewmates Lee and Marion. Before heading to Kagura Amaya, Marion warns the three to look out for a rogue large black robot known as the Phantom that is on the loose and causing problems. Now I'm going to stop the story there, as this plot can get very confusing very fast, as new developments are quickly thrown onto the player one after another. So in the interest of keeping this video short, I'm going to recommend my usual avenues for looking up the full story, such as watching walkthroughs and looking at plot summaries. On the surface, Super Robot Taisen OG Saga Endless Frontier looks and plays like a typical JRPG. You'll navigate your way across an overworld, visiting towns and dungeons as you go. The game does have one unique aspect to its overworld in the form of the different worlds the player can explore alongside their unique scenery, music and enemies. This results in the Endless Frontier having a very diverse range of unique looking environments, from fantasy to sci-fi. The destroyable object mechanic also makes its return from the Xenosaga trilogy, in which Haken can use his weapon to blow away obstacles to progress through dungeons. Despite the unique environment offered by the Endless Frontier, the game itself is limited in how much it can convey to the player, with the game appearing very bland when navigating the overworld and dungeons. Some have compared this look to an early Super Nintendo JRPG, and I have to agree, as the dungeon design can be somewhat underwhelming, even compared to other DS JRPGs. The game somewhat makes up for its poor overworld with full-size character models that appear during dialogue exchanges, which play out in a similar fashion to Namco X Capcom. The character models now appear much more detailed than they did in Namco X Capcom, and this allows us to marvel at the characters' assets. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this game is heavily built around fan service, not just from its attractive female protagonists, who make up the majority of the party, but also from the sheer amount of risque jokes in which the characters will frequently comment on each other's appearances, often in a sexualized manner. Most of these jokes are often hidden behind innuendos, allowing for the game to maintain a teen rating in the US. However, the humour can get pretty crass at multiple points, and might not be everyone's liking. Also, what might not be to everyone's liking is the lack of mechs in the game, despite being part of the Super Robot Wars series. On the topic of characters, throughout the story the trio of Haken, Ashen and Kaguya will soon be joined by Suzuka Hime, a close friend of Kaguya, who is also the princess of the Shiki Oni tribe and is trying to stop the appearance of the mysterious Malkel crystals which have recently appeared in her homeland. Along with Suzuka, the group is also joined by Cosmos from Xenosaga, now in her episode 3 appearance, as well as Regia Raizu and Zaimu from Namco X Capcom, who find themselves mysteriously transported to the Endless Frontier and are now looking for a way back to their original universes. Along with Cosmos, Reggie and Zaimu, the villains from these games also appear as enemies to face in battle. These enemies come in the form of the Gnosis and Orma minions, who appear alongside the game's original enemies in random encounters. Not only do Xenosaga and Namco X Capcom minions appear, but so too do some of the main antagonists. This includes Saya, who is once again out to cause interdimensional chaos despite her supposed death at the end of Namco X Capcom. Meanwhile, Cosmos is out to fight Telos, making her first, but not last, crossover appearance since her debut in Xenosaga Episode 3. Along with Saya and Telos, the party will also face down a whole host of other unique villains, resulting in a lot of boss fights in comparison to other JRPGs, with most dungeons involving the party facing down anywhere from 2 to 5 different bosses as they progress through the story. The sheer number of boss fights is a bit of a mixed bag depending on who you ask, as while one might like having multiple boss fights, others might find the grind to get through each fight a gruel, which is exorbitant by some fights lasting up to 15 minutes. Speaking about the combat, much like with other classic JRPGs, battles will occur randomly as you walk across the overworld and throughout dungeons. However, unlike other classic JRPGs, this game brings forward another unique battle system in the same way Namco X Capcom did. When in battle, your party is split into 2 groups, with the first 4 party members making up the front line of your party, while the remaining party members will support from the back line. At the start of the battle round, the player character and enemies will be randomly assigned a turn order, with those of higher speeds usually going first. Once your character turn comes up, the player will be prompted to select an enemy with the A button and begin attacking them. Once an attack begins, players of Namco X Capcom will soon find a familiar sight as you once again attempt to juggle enemies with your multi-hit combo skills. Unlike in Namco X Capcom though, skills are instead assigned to 5 slots before combat rather than using D-pad prompts. Each skill has a com count and characters will begin fights with 100 com, thus it's smart not to assign your 5 slots with skills that have a combined com count higher than your character's max com. Characters will gain around 50 com when their turn comes around and will usually max out at 100, but can, under certain circumstances, go even higher. Once you begin a combo, you must try to time your attacks to keep the enemy in the air without letting them touch the ground. Doing so will build your combo counter and will increase the chance of your attacks doing critical damage. If another one of your characters is next in line on the turn order, you can call that fighter in to continue the combo as part of their turn using right on the D-pad. You can also call one of the support fighters in from the back line to do a single attack to help you extend the combo. Combo is not just important for delivering high damage, as enemies who touch the ground during a combo may trigger a forced evasion. In this situation, the enemy will become immune to any more damage and your character's turn will end. They may also launch a counterattack dealing damage back at your character. While comboing, your character will slowly fill up the frontier gauge. This gauge is filled up even faster by calling in backline characters for attacks, as well as by skill cancelling. If at a specific point during a skill the player immediately initiates the next skill, they will get a cancel bonus and will jump into the next attack with an increased frontier gauge. Once the gauge reaches 100, the character can then activate Overdrive. Unlike skills, Overdrive does not cost com and can be activated at any time during the combo. When Overdrive is activated, the character will perform a powerful attack for massive damage. Along with your regular attacks, characters also use support spells, called spirits, at the cost of SP, which do your usual JRPG spiel of healing, buffing, debuffing, as well as other battle changing effects. Along with spirits, characters can also activate special skills in which rather than attacking one enemy, characters will instead attack multiple targets with occasional additions like healing. Super Robot Taisen OG Saga Endless Frontiers music was composed by Takuya Hanoka and Nafumi Suriyama. Composing tracks for the DS's limited sound card, the two composers rely heavily on chiptunes using MIDI instruments. However, to their credit, they've done a pretty solid job. The soundtrack is very upbeat, not just in the battle tracks but the overworld and cutscene tracks too. Much like in Namco X Capcom, each of the fighters has their own track that will play occasionally when they are in the battle party. These are arguably the game's best tunes, with Haken's theme, Alright, being an extremely catchy piece whenever it plays. As you can imagine, with characters from Namco X Capcom and Xenosaga in the game, we also treated to a handful of remix tracks from those games, such as Trembling City of Eris and Path to Certain Victory. However, I have no idea where Cosmos' theme of True Order comes from, as I've never heard it in any of the Xenosaga soundtracks. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I suspect the intensely orchestral soundtrack of the Xenosaga series was probably too much for the DS to handle, so they went with an original track that loosely sounds Xenosaga-ish. However, lacking a true Xenosaga track is hardly a big deal for a pretty solid soundtrack. Super Robot Taisen OG Saga Endless Frontier, this title is way too long, is a strange yet enjoyable game. While the plot can be quite difficult to follow due to its large and diverse cast and world, I still enjoyed it. Arguably, the combat is where this game's strengths lie. Using an updated version of the Namco X Capcom battle system gives this game a much flashier and faster paced battle system that I definitely found more enjoyable to play compared to the previous game. Also, the game has Cosmos version 4, who, as I said in my Xenosaga 3 retrospective, is my favourite video game character of all time. However, despite being a more enjoyable battle system, I did somewhat grow to loathe it for how repetitive it got after a while. Having to rearrange your skills before an attack rather than using D-pad prompts like in Namco X Capcom was kind of annoying, and the sheer number of damage sponge bosses really slowed my progress throughout the game. Unlike an SRPG whose battle system comes secondary to the strategic movement of units, a JRPG puts a lot more focus on its battle system to carry the game. While someone enjoyed this game's battle system, it's definitely no Tales or Xenoblade battle system, and I did somewhat grow bored of it. Super Robot Taisen OG Saga Endless Frontier was overall a fun game, but nothing too amazing compared to other games I've looked back on. Now I move on to this game's sequel to see if it can improve on this game's formula, so come back next time as we look back on Super Robot Wars OG Saga Endless Frontier Exceed.
僕らは一つになる